Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about digital media production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about podcasting. So we're going to talk about how we approach podcasting. What do we send out? How do we record them? How do we post them? Just kind of a general discussion. So if you've got questions about podcasting, today is your day. Throw those into Makana. And also, if you've got other questions, you can throw them in now for the general discussion for the first hour. Ask early, ask often, and make sure to vote. Look at every question and just say, I'm interested in that. I'm not interested in that. And just vote them up and down. And if everyone votes, we'll get a lot of votes. We'll see what happens. But it gives us a sense of you're really driving the show. The run of show is driven by the producers and what you ask and how you vote. So jump in early. And the best time is before 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so we have time to look at them. But you can also ask them during the show. We've got plenty of room for them today. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Alexander Knight here on the panel from Vancouver, BC. How are you supposed to find your completed jobs for Midjourney inside of Discord? There are too many requests flying by, and I have a hard time finding them. Is there a way to get perhaps the results in a direct message?
Javier.
Yeah, it's super distracting to see all that thing flying around. So I only get to the public channels to see what other people are doing, get ideas and everything. You can react to any prompt with an envelope reaction, and it will send you a DM. But actually, the best way to use your stuff is with a paid account. You can send direct messages to the bot, and you can keep your conversation directly there, and that'll be a lot easier.
Go, John.
Alexander, we have a server set up on Discord for rocketry, and we have Discord bot in there, and so I can put you in there, and then you can do Midjourney inside there. It's way simpler.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I have a Discord bot on one of my Discords and specific channel. You can't do it on other channels. You can only do it on that channel. And that works really well, and it saves a lot, even in the base Discord account. So I can go back a few months and pull out my Discords. The other way, if you don't want to do that, just simply go up to the right-hand corner of Discord and put your name into the search, and on the right side, it will pull all of your posts. You'll have to do a little bit of searching from there, but at least they're all your posts that you're searching from.
Yeah, and subscription makes it a lot easier, and there's three levels of subscription, I believe. There is the $15 a month one that is basic, and that's still public. Then you can pay an extra $20 a month to have it be private, so that you're not showing all the things that you're searching on in public. And then after that, you can there's a larger one that gives you more server time and is private. And that one is a little bit more expensive, and it's great. And then it's just a bot. It's a friend of yours sitting there that you can sit there and talk to and send out requests. And I do it. I literally have it open almost all day while I'm working, because I'm doing all my Keynote stuff now is all driven from Midjourney, and so I'm constantly asking it for things, so that I can put them into my presentations. Next question.
Tommy Chance in St. Paul, Minnesota says, is anyone on the panel familiar with the Sony 360 Reality Audio? I think Sony would be in the game with all the music they own, and then there's a link there.
Go, Jeffrey.
Oh yeah, they've been going side by side with Apple and their spatial audio. It's really no real difference between the two. It's just the name on that. I remember going to CES and they'd have the newest set of headphones. I think they were the first ones to actually do where you take your phone, you take a picture of your ear, and then they'd figure out how the best headphone for that or the best setup for that. So I did a few of those. But yeah, it's definitely a good alternative to spatial audio.
Yeah, there's quite a few spatial audio solutions that are out there, Sony being one of the larger ones. And I think a lot of it is always driven from people that don't want to pay Dolby licensing fees. So they're like, well, how do we do our own? And how do we build it? And I think that it was pretty close until Apple put spatial audio into music. And once Apple kind of stepped down on Dolby, it kind of left, like everyone kind of very quickly lost interest in most of the other formats. And so because it was just the market was so big for that most people are mixing for it. You can build an Atmos mix and then convert it over, I believe, to the Sony. The Sony, you can author both of those from the same source there. But I have not seen it in the wild. Other than you can find it on Tidal or you can find it on other things. But again, as soon as Apple kind of stepped down on it, we haven't stepped down on Dolby and just said this is what we're going to use. Everyone kind of started lining up pretty quickly to just take on the one format. So I haven't seen a lot of other formats succeed at any real level, like that I would think, oh, I should develop something in that format. Next question.
Al Trivet in Carmichael, California says, anyone see the live demo of GPT-4? And if so, thoughts? And he's got a link there to it.
Go ahead, John.
Oh boy, I was like a kid at Christmas time yesterday. GPT-4 was released. And then Greg Brockman did the shortest presentation I've ever seen. It was only like 22 minutes long, basically for developers. He showed the significant features in live on YouTube. And one of the big things, multimodal. So you can put an image now. You can put a link to an image up there, and it will describe the actual image. So I found an old picture of Chris Fenwick sitting at his desk, and it thought he was an audio engineer with a smirk. You know how he has a smirk on his face all the time, which is pretty funny. But so that was one of the significant improvements. They didn't increase the language parameters over GPT 3.5. What they did is they spent a lot of time on safety and security and made the model way more efficient. And it takes tests way better now. They have a whole list of exams that it's taken, and it's pretty significant.
Go, Jeffrey.
I like the OCR ability that they added to, so you could take a picture of your notes and put it in. Although, once again, you gotta really watch out for what you're posting there, because you don't want people to start finding your stuff, especially with the taxes. That was the other thing. I don't know if I'd want to have ChatGPT I'd want them to answer basic questions, but I don't think I'd want them to tell me how I'm going to save on my taxes or how much I'm going to save on my taxes, because that's a lot of personal information that goes in. And I think I know how to break ChatGPT, and that's by posting a picture and asking, how many fingers are in this picture?
That's very good. Yeah, it was funny. I was going back and forth with someone on Twitter, a teacher, and we were talking about what you should be using, what you should be doing in English class. That was the discussion, was like, what should people be teaching in English class? And I have a pretty strong opinion that kids should learn the mechanics of English. Like, we don't have to worry about they should read what they want to read and write what they want about things that they want to write, but we should be looking at the technical skill of them, what level of comprehension they have and what level of writing they can do. And the teacher said, well, if we did that, then I wouldn't be necessary. And I was like, no, you have to have somebody look at it. And then it was like, as soon as I wrote that, I was like, oh, I could use ChatGPT. Like I could use ChatGPT to, not quite yet, but probably GPT, because I was thinking about those testing, that you could give students, you could do a lot more papers and have the AI might not be able to create new things as well as other things. We've been thinking about how does ChatGPT create their term paper, but a more interesting question is, how does ChatGPT analyze their term paper? Like, so when you say, if we just take the Strunk and White rules and apply them to this, number one is showing someone, like annotating it, like this is all the things you could have changed to make it more active and to make it more powerful, and you could have rephrased this and you could have done this. The big problem with papers for teachers is they have to read them all, and they have to go through them. And what would be interesting, you could move to more papers actually, or more things where they're describing things, if you created something that was actually analyzing the structure of what they were doing and giving them expert feedback, so that they could be technically better at what they do, because most people don't exit school very good at that. So the machine would actually potentially do it better than a human would. Just mostly because of its ability to mass process. You could take the whole class and do it in 15 minutes instead of all night, to read it. So it's just it doesn't mean that the teacher is not needed. It just means that the teacher could do things and then scan over those and see how it's doing, and then answer questions and talk to them. But it would take a huge lift off of the teacher's plate, so they could focus on things that are more discussion based. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Alexander Knight, Vancouver, BC. Again, I was testing the HDMI output of my iPhone into an ATEM, but got nothing but black. I believe the Apple Lightning to HDMI adapter outputs 60 frames per second. However, the ATEM is manually set to 2997. Could that be the issue?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It certainly could. I would try and run it through. It may not like progressive 60 coming in, 2997 or 1080i if your Apple will do 1080i. If you plug that HDMI output out of that converter, Lightning to HDMI converter into an MDHX, if you have it, or an MD Cross, it'll show you on the little LCD panel what it's actually outputting, and not necessarily what Apple tells you it's outputting or the software tells you it's outputting. And that might be the difference. You might try plugging it into input number 1, but then everything else will try and conform to that, and that may be even a bigger problem. If everything, then that will work, but maybe nothing else will when it tries to resynchronize it. So that's a couple of choices to check.
Good, Bill.
I haven't found any problem, and I use the actual Apple adapter. I have an HDMI coming out of this and power going into it, and so I use this on an iPad Pro most of the time, but if I take my iPhone and plug it in directly, it works just as well. So there is some intelligence in there that's allowing it to work. I've had second-party adapter, third-party adapters, whatever you want to call them, fail to get a signal out, but most of the time this official Apple one works pretty reasonably and consistently.
Yeah, it's been a nightmare to use anything other than the Apple adapters for me. From the Lightning, it has just been, there are so many things about it that don't work. So I would highly recommend an Apple branded Lightning to HDMI. I bought maybe 5 or 6 brands other than Apple, and I've stopped. Next question.
Next question comes from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. We are scheduled to interview Blackmagic today at South by Southwest around 12:45 Central. What should we ask those fine folks?
Go, Jeffrey.
Well, it's going to be at the convention center, so it'll actually be a regular standard booth. It'll probably be a smaller booth than what we would see at NAB. Usually at NAB, they have the public area where everybody gets to test the stuff and look at the stuff, and then the back area for all the press people. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case there. And then, of course, what products they're going to have on hand. They're focusing on the cinema camera, so I'm guessing that's where everything is going to be. And then it's just going to also determine on who's going to be there. Most of their people are very well versed and can give you very good script answers. But if you're looking for something very deep dive onto it, then that might not be the right place to do that. So since it's South by Southwest, I'd be focusing more on doing the independent cameras and probably even get to talk to some independent creators as well.
Go, Bill.
I would annoy them terribly by talking to them at length about why they can't all get together between Blackmagic Raw and ProRes Raw and just make something that everybody can work with.
I keep on asking, where's the 8K camera? When are we going to get an 8K camera? That would be like it would be the 8K live camera. That's what we're all looking for here. And we have an 8K HyperDeck and we have an 8K switcher, but we don't have a camera. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. And Andy says, what can we expect in the next release of Zoom ISO?
Yeah, typically when you get this close to NAB, especially when you're talking about broadcast tools, you often will think about NAB being the target. So my guess is that the next Zoom ISO will release somewhere in the vicinity to anything less than 2 weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before NAB is probably when they'll want to release something or write at NAB to discuss it there because their broadcast is a big piece of what they do. Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas is back with us when the large language model that Google has been building for the medical world, an AI chat bot called MedPalm 2, now consistently passes medical exam questions with a score of 85%, placing it at expert MD. Comment?
Go, John.
Yeah, they're getting really good at test taking. So ChatGPT released their white paper on GPT-4 yesterday, and they listed off about 20 different professional exams that this thing takes compared to ChatGPT 3.5. No comparison. It scored 1410 on the SATs. The GMATs, it's in the 80 percentile and above in every exam, AP biology, calculus, chemistry. But my favorite test that it passed was the sommelier test.
So it knows wines. Nice.
I tell you, that's great. Go, Jeffrey.
So I wouldn't, like the taxes, I wouldn't want to have my personal information put into there. But I also see it like what Google Glass was trying to do back in 2013. And that was basically have a pair of Google Glass sitting next to a defibrillator or a med kit. And then when somebody goes into an emergency situation, you have a place to ask a question. How do I do chest compressions? How does this work? And get an accurate answer, maybe not the totally correct answer, but an accurate answer, so you could try and save a person's life. So I like it a lot. And of course, learning.
I don't know whether that's a comment on how good ChatGPT is or how useless tests are. I'm not sure. I'm still kind of. I'm just not sure that we know which one that means. Go ahead, Courtney.
What scares me about that result is that they consider MDs expert if they're only 85% right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of
disappointing.
There's a high mortality rate in that last 15%. Next question.
Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC says, has anyone tried the Small Rig RM75 small battery powered light? I have it plugged in over USB-C to a GAN charger. After 35 minutes, the output level drops from 100% to 60%. And he's got a link there to the system.
So you've been playing with it, Alexander?
Yeah, I just bought it and I've been running it for the last week or so, but I did notice seems like very strange behavior and there's absolutely zero documentation about this problem.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I'm going to bet that it isn't a heat problem. I mean, it's a heat problem, not a power problem. I bet you it's getting to a certain heat level and then it drops down. That's my guess, is that it's got something that's protecting itself and it's turning off. It's probably, especially if you have a GAN charger for a little light like that. Now I wonder, the other question I have is that you put it on a GAN charger, and it might actually be pulling too much into it. We GAN charger, I've been learning, is not doesn't fix everything. In some cases, it gives things too much power, and they're actually recharging. And it's not that it's breaking them, but it's increasing the heat on the component because it's pulling in so much. It's pulling in so much current. And so you may find that if you plugged it into something with less power, that it may not. I think it's overheating. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I agree. Everything. I think Alex is sending you down a good road to experiment with. The other thing is that almost no lights, those little small lights, do I ever run on 100%. If there's any kind of dimming capability, and I don't know this one, I'd pull it down to about 75% of its output. Also, depending on what you're using for, if you're using it for a key light, that's probably not the right device. Most of the time, those small lights, I just use as little obies to put a catch light in somebody's eye or something like that. So it doesn't really need to be very bright to do that. And that might solve the problem if you pull it off 100 down to somewhere in the upper between 50 and 75% of its output. That may make the draw so low that it doesn't cause some of these problems.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, Alex, you raised a good point that actually makes me think now, because the product came with a USB-C to Type A cable here, and I actually haven't tested just plugging it directly. Like, I've got a power distribution unit in front of me that has like a 1 amp or a 2.1 amp USB port, so I could try that and see if that actually fixes it here. So
that's 12
it
watts.
Actually is.
That's
running
a 12 watt. That's a 12 watt output, and if you may be giving it 30 watts or 100 watts, and that it's not that it can't do that. Now, I have some things that just don't even turn on. They don't even charge. As soon as you give them too much voltage off of a GAN, it will just immediately stop working. It's just like, that's way too much for me. So I've kind of been learning about what I can and can't plug it into it. Anyway, something to think about. And the things that do plug into it, if you put 100 watt into something that can handle it, it gets pretty warm. That's why I was thinking about whether that might be the case. Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace, Austin, Texas. What just happened? Microsoft gave its Edge browser a new tool today called Copilot. Copilot is an AI assistant in Edge's right-hand sidebar. What other AI apps or browser plugins are out there now, or can we expect to see soon?
Go ahead, John.
So Microsoft did something very clever here. They call all their AI assistants Copilot because they're non-offensive. A lot of people are still turned off by the term AI, and they're scared about the term AI. And so Microsoft has chosen Copilot. This is the name of the product that they use for Codex, which is the product that's built into my brain just shut off. The programming code in GitHub is called Copilot. That's where they developed this name. But Copilot is, as a helper to human beings, and it's not displacing human beings. You're going to see Copilot show up everywhere in Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, everywhere. They're going to use that brand name to soften the edge of AI integrated into all of their applications.
It is something that you just start talking to. Like I have ChatGPT. I was playing with ChatGPT 4 yesterday, and I decided I make this osh soup that ChatGPT 3 gave me, and I thought, well, it's time to have get a new recipe because ChatGPT 4 is here, and so I asked for a new osh soup. And I said, make me a great osh soup. So it made me one. I said, make me an authentic one. And it just made me another one. And I told it how many quarts I wanted to make of it. And it just figured out how many. And then I said, but without the pasta. And then it just made me another one without the I was just like, I'm never going back to recipes when I can just ask it to, keep on like, I want to do it for this many quarts or this many people. I want this kind of thing. I don't want this stuff in it. Like all the things that you wish you could get with the recipes, and you're sitting just asking it all the things. And you're not, and it's a conversation. You have to remember, you're not like trying to rebuild your question. You just keep on asking it, well, do this and do this. And yeah. And go ahead, Courtney.
I discovered a new tool on Matt Wolf's site just the other day called Perplexity, and it's a plugin to, I can show you it here. It's a plugin to Chrome. So you can add this Chrome, you click on the little thing here, and you type anything. So it's a AI assistant. But the interesting thing is you can either choose to search the internet, the current domain, or the current page. So if you have a certain site and you want to limit its responses to just the current domain, like, what are you, corporate, corp, I can't type now. What are new corporate tax laws? And it comes up with an answer, and it shows you links where it got the information and alternate information there. It's a plugin. It goes wherever Chrome does. So that's very handy. Perplexity.ai. It also works on Apple iPhones as well.
I do think that it's going to, again, I know people think it's going to replace people. I don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen. I think there's really going to augment what we can do, where we're simply just going, hey, I want to do this thing and I want to customize it and I want to, look at this. And again, to go back to my recipe example, I think you're going to be able to take a picture of it, put it up there and go, but I don't want this. I don't want to have this in ingredients. What would you change with there? Or how would you do this? Or, and so I think that the amount of customization that we're going to see very, very soon is going to be really, really interesting. Just a reminder that we have plenty of room for more questions. So if you've got questions or voting, we don't tax you for the vote yet. So it's still free. It's still free to vote. So vote on those questions, and also ask questions. It's general questions for the first hour. Remember, we're doing podcasting in the second hour. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. One pro return to office argument used by business leaders has been that offices can foster stronger connections between people. Would AI sentiment analysis incorporated into the collaboration tools we use help foster healthier connections between people?
Go ahead, Javier.
Well, I really wouldn't want to have like this, you didn't say thank you, robot. You didn't want someone checking your answer, like you were you were not nice with that message. But it can help to give you like context, because we sometimes use like some words or like it happens to me that I write a message and I send it and I check it like 2 hours later and I was like, or I wasn't so clear, or I wasn't empathetic enough, or so it can give you some hints, and especially when you know the other person, because now we're working in this diverse environment with people from all over the world and with different backgrounds, and different words have different meanings for different people. So having these words, like if you're speaking to Alex, you should say it like this, or he doesn't like to like fool around, he go direct to the point, or maybe for her, she like tried to give it more context because he likes a more human connection. I don't know, like giving all that sort of things, because it knows how you write and the other person writes, so it can help. But I don't like the teacher like, you're not being nice to your coworker. That'll be good.
It would be really kind of funny to have it in your thing. Like, I can't believe, and it should pop up with a little window that says, "I can't believe you're about to say that." Like, I think you should really think about whether you hit send or not. Like it could be your GPT conscience. Like, do you really think that that's a good way to phrase that? It'd be funny. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. Focusrite Scarlett in the effects loop into a guitar head amp from my Mac with Amplitude, the guitar rig and so forth. Works, no issues with latency, but would you do it live? Any thoughts on having a Scarlett in that loop?
Go ahead, Alexander.
Just reading that whole explanation of that whole setup makes me nervous for any kind of live use. I would not suggest it. For a live rig, if you weren't going to use just a straight up, all analog tube setup with pedals, Kemper Profiler is what most guys use for modeling, in a live scenario, or Neural DSP. That's also another good solution. You could also use an Apollo, Universal Audio Apollo, because you do have DSP. If you have the right plugins, you can do it there. But just all those different software-based native apps, that would make me very nervous live.
Go, Jeffrey.
Just to quickly explain what's going on. So Amplitude and Guitar Rig and some of these others are where you bring the audio into the iPad or the iOS device, and then it gives you different pedals, so you can control and condition your audio and then bring it back out into the audio. With that said, I've done that before on acoustic shows. I know that there's some musicians in the area that use this with the iRig Stomp, which is basically you put the iPad right on top of the pedal board or on a stand, and then it is the processor for this pedal board. So you have actually have foot switches and a wah or a volume pedal with that. So they haven't had much problem with that. But if the system crashes, the system crashes, and that's the case with anything that's all in one.
Next question.
Zach Jeffries in Spokane, Washington, recently picked up a Decklink Quad 2, but software like Wirecast haven't been modernized to take advantage of the multiple ports outside of Program Out. What software can I look at to get aux video mixes out of a switching program?
And I think that depends on whether Wirecast runs on a Mac and a PC, so it depends on whether you're on a Mac or a PC. I think that the one that I would look at on a PC is probably vMix. vMix should be able to take advantage of those outputs. And on the Mac, I'd probably look at Memo Live. I know that Memo Live can. So vMix and Memo Live would be the two that I'd look at, depending on Mac or PC, to make that actually work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael has the next question. It says, Mark Zuckerberg says that Facebook engineers perform better when they work in person. Thoughts? And he's got a link there.
I've had the opportunity to sit in Facebook at a desk, and try to get work done. I find it to be almost impossible to do any work or to think, because people keep on talking to me, and then there's people talking to each other, and then there's people talking to other things, and I don't agree. I think that there are definitely things, if you're trying to hack things out or figure things out, I think that it is I think that there's a possibility that those are good ideas. I mean, and I admit that I had kind of a bit of an open office. My Pixel Core had we had probably 40 employees, and we had a handful of offices, but for the most part, the doors were opened all the time. People just wandered in and out. There was no I had an office, but it was mostly where people came over to talk to me. When I look back on it, it would have been good for me to shut the door 3 hours a day to get stuff done. It was just very hard to think, because you're getting interrupted all the time. I've really learned to value continuous time to think about the same thing in a way that I didn't before. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think most people hate it. Like they hate being in an open office. I think that they'd probably come back into the office if if you gave people offices, like not just cubicles, but offices, and you didn't pack them in like cattle. They'd probably want to come back. And, there's a lot of ways for companies to bring people back, and it's creating a better lifestyle for them so that they feel like they can actually get stuff done. Having people around and being able to go to a conference room or sit around a table or have lunch together and talk about a problem. I think a lot of people would be really interested in that if they had their own office. But if they're, packed into an open office, people are not resisting coming back to the office as much as they are resisting an open office. Like that's what they hate, and that's what they don't want to come back to. And so I think that companies are going to keep on digging through this, but they have a lot less employees. Just build out the space, let them have some space there, and let the ones that want to come back. Next question.
Zach Jeffers is back from Spokane, Washington. I'm testing video upload over Starlink in motion from vehicles with no cell service. Often connections drop and so forth. Any recommendations for video transport to our cloud server? Disconnects are fine, trying to minimize gray compression artifacts.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So Keenan was testing this out a couple days ago. He was actually driving, I can't remember where he was driving to. He was in the Vegas area. And he was doing 65 miles per hour at 720p video, and the connection was staying fairly well from there. I'm not sure any other options other than cell, if you're saying that the cell is not available. But I guess it's really in what you have for obstructions and what you have for region of area that you're at.
Yeah, I think that the hard part you have is occlusions. So you can move with that dish. The hard part is that if you go by trees, if you go by buildings, if you go by a lot of other things, you're occluding whatever the satellite is that it's looking at, and so you're going to get a problem with that. What you want to look at probably is a PEP link. So think about having with no cell services, you're not going to have success. But if you have cell service and you get a PEP link and you bond those together, so you have 2 or 3 cellular connections, and then you have the Starlink and you prioritize the Starlink, but you have other connections that are working, it's not going to fix it where you have no cell service, because with no cell service, you're going to have, it's not, I don't think it's the moving that's the problem. It's the occlusions that are going past you that become the problem, that are cutting out. So I think that you want to look at how you can mix and match those connections to make that actually work. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana, says, any tips for working with younger crew members who think they know all the tech but actually need to learn how to use it and to treat gear with gentle hands?
What we did very, very often within PixelCore was to hire people with very little experience. Sometimes they had some experience. I mean, they went to school, but that didn't really mean anything. And so we usually, we had people who are now working at pretty big companies that we hired, and they were selling shoes before we had them, and literally selling shoes. And what we found was that what was really important was a heterogeneous mix of people. So what you don't want is one person that knows something surrounded by lots of people that don't know anything. I mean, that can help some. But what really helped is having 2 or 3 people that were very knowledgeable inside of a group of 15 or 20 that were coming up to speed. And there were certain things that you'd repeat over and over again, and you'd explain things, and you'd talk through things, and you'd have lunches, and you talk through, this is where having everybody in one place made a difference. Is we'd stop for a second and talk about something, or we're constantly working out problems, and then being willing to give them responsibility and then give them feedback as they were working through it and working through that. And those handful of people. So, we had 2 or 3 people that worked at the company that were extremely skilled, that were surrounded by people who were able to work hard but weren't at the same level. And they came up very quickly up to that. They can learn very fast, especially if you're putting them into projects. And those projects, we wanted to have them see production as often as we could. So we would, even if they're in the warehouse, we'd send them out as PAs. Then we'd send them out as camera operators. Then we'd send them out as graphics operators. We want to have them see all those things while they're working through those. And they see it. They have to do it. They get expert feedback. And then as far as being gentle, we used to call it being soft hands. And we just explained that the last inch of everything they set down makes all the difference. They can move it around like this, but when they set it down, if you could hear it usually someone would come up to you and talk to you about the fact that they could hear you set down the item. And we said, we sold to people, you only do that with rental equipment. Like, you don't do it with our equipment. And because we own so much equipment that we just really, and it was hard. It's not just hard. The hardest, it turned out the people that were the hardest to train to use soft hands were people who did a lot of production with rental gear, because they're just used to just slamming things in and moving things around. It's not their gear. And so it was easier to teach the young folks to do it correctly than it was to teach guys who have been doing it for 30 years, in a rough way. And because then they would come back and say, well, this is the way I've done it all the blah, 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 and that was the harder piece of it. But it does greatly increase the length of how long you look at it. And the way we explained it was, you can do damage to something and it just doesn't, it's not that it stops working right then. It's just that if you keep on doing it, things inside will fall apart. And then we get surprised when something goes wrong instead of knowing that we have what we have. The other thing that we talked about, we got upset with scuffs. Like, if you scuff the front of one of our devices, there'd be a conversation about how that happened, because what we explained to a lot of people that worked for us was how our equipment looks creates confidence, and everything about what we do is a confidence game. The client being confident that we can pull off something that is probably impossible, and they have to have confidence in us, and the way we dress, the way we act, the way our equipment looks, the way our desks look, all of that creates confidence, in what we can do. And then we have to actually do it. But panicky clients make things much harder for us to execute what we're trying to do. Next question.
Zach Jeffries in Spokane, Washington's up next. Recent project has the need to submix for a production truck, but also submix the multi-view. Any suggestions for a mobile setup to submix and at the same time submix for a multi-view?
Yeah, a lot of times this is why we use routers. So we'll route out the same things to. I'm assuming when you say mix, you're talking about sub-edit. Mix. Usually, when you say mix, I'm going to say audio, but it's. So I'm not sure if that's what you're. But when you say multi-view, it says video. So I'm not sure exactly where you're coming from on this specific question. But otherwise, what we do is we have routers, and we will send out. A lot of times we patch all the cameras into the router, and then we take those cameras and we match them out to edit one, and then edit potentially another edit to do that sub edit. And sometimes you're taking the outputs of the first switcher and moving back into the router. But routers make all of this stuff possible, is to be able to pass that through. And I probably don't do any show. I don't know how many shows I've done in the last decade without a 40 by 40 router. Like, it's just like, that's like minimum. I'm going to stick that in. And then you go up from there. You can get these 288 by 288, and routers are like bags. You'll fill them with as many inputs and outputs as you have. You never go, oh, I didn't only use half. You just use more, and you make a better show. Next question.
Ben, looks like Bedward in New Gloucester, Wisconsin, says, using a Windows 10 with a Behringer XR32, I only see 8 audio sends from the computer over USB to the mixer. How would I access all 32 channels of input to the mixer over USB in Windows?
I think to do that, you'll need Dante. You'll need something. Yeah, so Dante will get that out to, you'll be able to access all those channels. The USB just doesn't support that. Go ahead, Courtney.
You might check and see if there's a newer version of the ASIO drivers for Behringer for Windows 10, because there have been some bugs in the other ones, and it might be limiting you to 8 channels. But I think it should be able to do 32.
I don't know if it can. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I thought it was you create block patches, and there are block patches of 8 channels, and then you create a second block patch. So the first block patch is 1 through 8, second block patch is 9 through 16, and that would get it into the computer. But I haven't done that, so that's just a guess.
Yeah, and Mickey says, of course, that the card, the USB card that comes with it, should be able to do 32 by 32. So do make sure that you have the latest firmware. Next question.
I'll try to get through this. Zach Phillips in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania says this: will the ATEM HDMI camera control work with a HyperDeck in between? The new studio camera's HDMI outputs 4K, unlike the Pocket, and he has a thumbs down emoji. So camera into HyperDeck, record 4K, HDMI out, continuing to the ATEM. camera controls coming back down the chain, but then he leaves it kind of hanging there.
I don't think so. I don't think that'll work. So I don't think that you'll be able to do that. I think that, again, to get back to the conversation that we had about the router, what you'd want to do is convert the HDMI to SDI, to do that. But you're going to have something that's passing both directions there. And the hyperdecks are not designed for that. So you're not going to be able to run them, loop them through. And typically in a production, once we start using those hyperdecks, we think about not looping through things, like that's when you start using hyperdecks, you're going to start thinking about SDI. You're going to start thinking about, a router distributing the same signal to multiple outputs, those types of things. And I think that we're, and again, all of this is really complicated with SDI and HDMI. I think that as we go through the next couple of years, we're probably going to see 2110 start up. And as 2110 is kind of the adult version of NDI. And so as 2110 kind of lights up across the system, you're not going to have to deal with as many of these things as you are now, because you'll have, you'll just put an Ethernet in and make it work. So it'll be, that's probably not too far away. Next question.
Zach Jeffers in Spokane, Washington. Mimo Live is quite a bit different than most mixing software. Which educational materials do you recommend that really goes through the functionality and best practices?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Zach, you're right. It is different. Most video switching softwares use a bus metaphor. Some use, like for example, OBS, which I use in conjunction with my ATEM, use a scene metaphor. And the best way of thinking about Mimo Live is it's kind of like Photoshop for video. You have a stack of layers that you can turn on and off and reposition left or right. I know specifically you're asking about training. There's they've put a lot of training material on their website, and if you haven't been through that, I would do that. But Mimo Live is very unique, means one of a kind. Mimo Live is unique for sure, but it's important to kind of classify it properly. It's sort of like layers for video. I will say this from my own use of it a couple of years ago. Learn how to use the layer sets, because you can trigger those with a keyboard shortcut. Once you can trigger them with a keyboard shortcut, you can map that to a Stream Deck.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was also noting that the developer of Mimo Live, Oliver Breidenbach, is a kind of a friend of the show. He's been around for a long time, and you will occasionally see him as part of the panel, or maybe he will come in and do a demo. So if you have more questions the next time you see him, keep an eye on the listing of what shows are coming up. And if you see either Oliver Breidenbach or Mimo Live as a topic in the show, you might be able to ask your questions directly to the developer. That's amazing.
Yeah, and a couple of things there. One is that the best way to think about a lot of these things also is to, when you're having trouble with something, open up notes. I keep notes open a lot, but open up notes and type into it like questions about things and go, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I can't do this. You will forget most of those while you're working. You'll go, oh, I don't understand it. And then you find some solution and you keep moving and you forget to write them down. And then you keep on hitting that hook over and over and over again. What I do is I've been doing this for probably 30 years now, is I write them down like while I'm working. This is where the RFIs came from, was because I write things down that I don't understand while I'm doing it. Like, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I don't try to figure it out right then. I just make it a list. When I'm having lunch, I sit around and I Google things. And when I don't, when I don't find it quickly, I then reach out to somebody and ask. But the best thing is, and this is the great thing for asking questions for office hours in general. The reason office hours is so question oriented is because that's how I like to learn, which is that I like to be working on things and then ask people relevant questions for what I'm doing right then, contextually, and then I can remember it forever. But I can't do it if someone just hands me a bunch of information that I have to watch. And so what you want to do is with all of this stuff is to be writing things down as you go. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. We are going to be doing more labs with Mimo, so it's a good thing to start writing them down now, where Oliver and I and a couple other people, because I'm using Mimo a lot more every day, and so I'm using it once a week for the Michael Krasny show, and I'm doing it using other things, as we put it together, and that's kind of become something. And I still don't understand all of it, so you'll see labs where Oliver and I sit around in the coming weeks, sit around for an hour and I ask them questions like, how do I do this? What's the best way to do this? Same thing that we're talking about here, but we're hoping that people like you, Zach, come in and ask questions as well. And we are working with Oliver to see if we can't get another. In the early days of office hours, we did a 90-day version of Memo so that we could all learn together. So we'll probably start with these labs, but then we'll pick up speed by, I think, getting everybody 30 days or 90 days with Memo so we can all kind of learn it together. I find it much more powerful to learn it as a group than learn it by ourselves. Next question.
Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC, back again. What do we all think of the new Blackmagic Design TV Studio HD8 ISO pricing? I was looking at some reviews and some are criticizing it, calling it overpriced for the amount of inputs and outputs.
Go ahead, John.
I don't think it's overpriced. It's $3,000. Just those surfaces. I don't know how much those 1ME and 2ME panels, but they cost about the same price as this entire switcher, don't they, Alex?
It's a little less, but not much. It's about the same price, and so that's what's creating the cost. Is the interface. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Blackmagic's design, they had these two just control panels for $3,000 and $6,000 for a single ME and a 2ME. And that doesn't give you all the I/O. And the new panel, the new one, has the OLED scribble strips on them, so you can label each input and output dynamically. That cost a lot of money to put into that interface, and to combine that with the entire switcher interface in one package, I think it's actually reasonably priced.
Yeah, measuring it by measuring it by the I/O is I don't think a great way to approach that. But it often. I will admit, when people review things and they do things that to me are obviously wrong, it taints my view of all of their reviews. Because that's to say that this is going to be a certain price if they're not paying attention to how much a panel costs or they don't have an understanding of that. Then I just go, well, I don't know if these guys know what they're talking about. Go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say, it actually wasn't, I should have clarified, it wasn't the YouTube reviewers, it was all those people on the internet leaving comments saying it's overpriced, it doesn't have it.
Yeah, it's Yahoos. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Alex, you mentioned how equipment looks creates confidence in you. What are some tips in cleaning up a messy desk full of cables?
Well, a messy desk at home, I don't really do very much work because I'm constantly changing it. Other than that, we definitely pay a lot of attention. One of the things that, like what we just talked about with that switcher, is we tend not to use that kind of switcher because it creates lots of cables on the desk, which are hard to deal with. We want the cables to be off somewhere else. And then we try to take them straight off of oftentimes on a desk, we try to take them straight off of things. We want just control surfaces on the desk with as few things going into them as possible. A lot of times when we have, mixers and so on and so forth, they're sitting there, but we don't like to have a lot of things wandering around the desk when we can avoid it. Obviously, when you're doing a setup for a given day, there's only so much you can do, and you just have to, but cable management and how we process that, a lot of times when we have a day or two of setup, there's a lot of discussion about where all those cables are going to go. We use a lot of, I can't think of the wraps that you put on them. So they're basically like, I've got 20 cables to go here and I put them on a loom. It's called looms. And we put looms on them to keep them all together all the way over. The nice thing about looms instead of tape is that that it's easy to get in and out of them without them getting all sticky. So you put them into the looms, and then you can go and unwrap them and pull them out, or usually add. We don't usually pull. Once cables go in on a build, they're there until the end of the show. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, there's a whole universe of cabling accessories. I wish I was better at it. I have all the best intentions, and I have a whole box full of different kinds of things that go from little plastic spiral wraps for a few cables to Velcro attached things. I have things that stick on the wall and open up. You can lay cables inside of and close back up. And I do a pretty good job for about the first half of the day that I'm working on it. And then you get to what Alex is talking about, which is, this is going to have to come out and change and back and forth. So I still end up with a small pool of cables under my desk that are nowhere near as well dressed as I can. This is just, you have to determine what level of obsession do you have about it. There are whole YouTube channels that are designed around people who are just fanatic and the big facilities guys who, men and women who wire these unbelievably complex things beautifully, so that the back of every server rack has every single cable perfectly positioned and perfectly secured. People just, those are fabulous.
Yeah, and it was similar to the question that was yesterday about power cables. What makes a lot of this less messy is really good drawings. So the better you draw out, and one of the things that happens for a lot of our stuff is on site, we'll have someone like Kevin Hansen or someone else doing as-builts. So basically what that means is when I move something in the show, he changes the drawing. Like I tell him I'm moving this to this, over, and he moves it in the drawing as we're working. And so it's constantly, so when we get to the end of the show, we have a drawing of what this show looked like and how we did it. When we have to come back to it 12 months later, because this is a once a year show, we have an as-built. We also take tons of photos of our layouts when then we have lots of discussions about what worked and didn't work. And we do all those other things. And so that when we design it for the next show, even if it's a year apart, that's why those RFIs that we write are so important of what's working and not working in real time, writing those down so that we know what those are. The as-built drawings, as well as those bits, as well as the pictures, allow us to have a better idea of how to not have cables going everywhere, not adding a lot of new things at the end. Next question.
Zach Jeffers in Spokane, Washington, calling back to the Starlink connection. Is SRT the best solution for this high latency connection, or is there a better transport for the feed in a high dropout environment?
I think the best would be Zixi. If I were doing what you're doing, I would probably use a elemental link. I would just take an elemental link and I'd attach it to your satellite dish, and then I would be driving along, send it to AWS, and then push it out. I think that would have the highest level. SRT is close, probably 85% as effective as the link. So it's pretty close, but it's not going to be the same. Next question.
Harshi Trivedi, Daytona Beach. Has anybody heard of the offerings from Sennheiser? Could it be something you send out to your talent? And he's got a couple specific Sennheiser USB microphones and similar.
Yeah, go ahead, Javier.
The Sennheiser profile podcasting mic, I think it's a good option. I really like the Sennheiser as a brand. I think have great quality. It's like $129, and they have like a $199 package that has like the cable, the boom arm, and the microphone, and I think that's a great deal. It has controls at the front, like they have a physical mute. It has a mix volume from the input and the output. It has a gain control, and it has, I think, an output level. So I think for less experienced people, it's a great option to have a good sounding mic with a lot of control, all packaged in a little bundle. And it's a great brand, so I think it's a good idea.
Go, Jeffrey.
In sending at home kits, I don't think it's a great idea. It's a condenser mic to begin with, and I'm a big fan of sending out dynamic microphones like this one right here. That way, if there's a lot of room noise, a lot of bounce, then it's going to get a lot of off-axis rejection with this type of microphone. Too many dials on that Sennheiser. The center dial is, and I've got a microphone downstairs. I'll grab it for second hour for the podcasting. They're starting to add this pass-through option where you can hook up a computer that goes into the microphone, and then you can control the difference of the volume between your microphone and the music that's coming in through a game or something like that through that dial. And that's what that Sennheiser has right there. And it probably wouldn't even be used for, depending on what you're doing, but it'll definitely, if they start playing with any of those dials, then you run into new problems that in mid-show you just don't want to deal with. So, and then finally, having a boom arm is nice, but it's a boom arm that attaches to the table. I would most likely send them something that comes, like a regular stand, and then have the microphone on a boom arm that way.
Yeah, if the talent's going to use it over and over and over again, I'd be more likely to say it's a good idea. Sending something that they can play with. If they're going to use it once for a show, you're right that the dials become a problem. Like the dials are a real challenge when someone's going to do the first time I'm going to see this mic is the only time I'm going to use it, because to your point, they tend to fiddle with them. The number one problem we have with remotes, we can talk about this in the podcasting section, is the blue microphone is kind of the devil, like, for us, because there's too many settings and people turn them to the wrong thing and they talk into the wrong angle and they, but we've kind of learned to hate that mic, and when it's used properly, it sounds great. It's just not used properly very often. And so that's the real challenge that we have. And so lots of settings can be difficult there. It looks like a really interesting mic. My pocket is getting a little warm. That it might be time to test more mics again, but I have to get better at sending them back. Now that I know that I can, if I buy them from Amazon, I can take them back to Whole Foods. I might go back into getting more mics. We'll just use them for a week and then I'll send them back if they don't work. Next question.
Next one comes from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. What's the best way to improve how Siri translates my voice-to-text transcriptions? Each time I say content, Siri writes contact. This started after the last update. I miss the old Siri, she says.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
I had a friend that had every time they used Siri, they said they could never get it correct, but they were using their phone and they were like holding it super weird where they were covering the microphone. So my suggestion is to make sure that the microphones are clear of any obstruction, maybe clean it off with a rag or something like that. If you're using something like a HomePod, get it in a spot. The other problem I always have is the HomePod doesn't respond and then the phone responds. So I say, play music, and all of a sudden it's coming from my phone, not my HomePod. So get that microphone in a good area that's direct to your voice.
Javier.
Yeah, super quickly. I remember that Siri, well, in iOS, you can have like this text transforms to this other. So substitution, I think it's called in the settings. So every time I get Siri like getting something wrong, I get that word, I put it in a substitution and I put the real word. So that will help you a lot because it eventually is going to be substituting every time it mistranslates it or mistypes it to that other word.
I've just learned I have to learn how to talk to a lot of these things in a way that I just look at what it takes for them to say it. So you'll see sometimes I'll sit there and just say the word over and over again, just watching what it pops out. Now, the other thing to remember is that it's contextual. So it's looking at the other words before and after it. So sometimes you see it rewrite it. So that's the other thing you have to kind of be careful of. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, when Disney had to implement an MCR at home solution, one comment was that 100 megabits per second plus video streams would choke typical home internet connections. In an age where cable companies are offering 300 megabits per second as a basic tier, is this still true?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, because it depends on the interface equipment that you have. Your cable company may not be providing you with a router or a switch, and a lot of those routers and switches, if they're older, are 100 megabits total. So they're not all gigabit switches. So you'd be best to replace all your switches, routers, and Wi-Fi with gigabit compatible switches and routers. So that could be a problem, choking it at 100 megabits. But your typical upstream is only about 5 to 10 megabits, and downstream is even less. So,
yeah, I think that the real challenge is that if on those basic tiers, they're not guaranteed. So they say you might get that. Like I have a 1 gig connection theoretically from Comcast, and often days I see no more than 40 or 50 megs a second, and so that's the real challenge, is that they're not really, if you're in a consumer connection, if you have a business connection, you tend to get what you paid for, but you pay a lot more for it and if you're doing MCR at home, that's probably okay. The real question is whether whatever you're doing at home, does it need to be the full resolution? So a lot of times what we see is people using a lower resolution or a more compressed resolution for them to make the decisions they need to make. When they need to actually have very low latency, I'm actually doing an MCR remotely, then you start talking about dark fiber or dedicated fiber. So most of these companies can put that in, and there's companies called The Switch, that can do those things. And I've seen them put The Switch into people's houses. so it can, and now you have a 1.5 or a 1 gig connection in and out, guaranteed, it works. And that's when you can really start to build up on that. And it seems like it would cost a lot of money. It might cost you $3,000 or $4,000 a month for that connection. But if you're doing a lot of shows, it's not a big deal. But you can send somebody at that point, you can start sending real data back and forth and make it happen. So doing it at home is possible. It's just about how much you're willing to pay per month to get it. Next question.
Tom McKinnon at Simon's Island says, has anyone doing cloud-based productions used any of the a la carte cloud computing services like Vagon or Shadow? Shadow has 2 W's at the end.
Yeah, I haven't seen anybody using either one of those services so far. So we'll keep talking about it. Cloud services is something we're going to talk a lot more about as we go through the year. Next question.
Next one comes from Mike Potter in Hanover, Germany. After updating the firmware in my Insta360 link, it does not zoom out anymore in Zoom when switching to another cam and back. That's great. Or is it caused by a Zoom update, which I also have installed?
I'm going to bet that it's the Insta360 link update that says don't listen, don't change when it makes that first request. So it's probably Insta360. And I'm glad that you mentioned that there's an update. Do some firmware updates to all my cameras. All right, next question.
Zach Phillips, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Talking wiring diagrams, are you using H2R Gear for that or OmniGraffle? I find that all these software tools end up with me fiddling and I end up back on paper, but that does not scale well.
I've been playing with H2R graphics, and I think that for many people, H2R graphics is plenty. Like, it will do all the things that you need it to do. I will admit that I've been building wiring diagrams for 15 years on OmniGraffle. It'd be very hard for me to switch to anything else just because I'm used to it. And it's harder to use than H2R graphics, but it is more flexible. Like, I have lots of layers. And so what'll happen for me is I've got a video layer and an audio layer and a power layer, and a communications layer. And so there's a bunch of layers that I have there. And then I have very complex connections between all of those layers. And so that becomes one of those things that I don't think I can do that in HDR graphics that way. And HDR graphics, I think, is built for someone different than what we're doing. The next level up from what I'm doing is AutoCAD. So what most things are put together in, Marty Brennis, who has been on here occasionally, what he does are big wiring diagrams with thousands and thousands of connections across an entire facility where everything has to be labeled and everything has to be accounted for. And when you go over to his desk, he's upstairs from our office. It's all AutoCAD. so that's what you kind of build that scale in. And now we're going to jump into our second hour and talk about podcasts. So if anyone here wants to add their 2 cents to it before we jump into questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll give a little introduction. So I've been working on podcasts either as a guest or as someone who's creating them since before they were called podcasts. They were just like RSS feeds with, like, we didn't know what to call them. And then Adam Curry was kind enough to give them a name, and then we all kind of took it. Leo tried to not connect it to the pod and tried to call it Netcast, but that didn't really go anywhere. And so we have these podcasts, and we're going to talk probably a little less about the RSS nature of those. It's probably a whole second hour, and more about the production of them. How do we create this content? And there's a couple different ways that we think about creating that content. There is, of course, you can be connecting it where everyone's talking in the same place. So some of the podcasts that we do, we have everybody around a table and we all have mics, and we record those together and then put them out. We then have regulars, people who are always going to be on the same podcast. So if you look at Mac Break, generally there's 4 of us that are almost on almost every single podcast. And so that we're regulars and we pop in, and there's an advantage to that is that our kit is kind of set up for it. We understand how it's going to work. We know how to put it together. Then you have podcasts where you are bringing people in that are only going to be there for that one podcast, either a round table or an interview or other types of those types of podcasts. And so those are discussions there. And then finally, you really have, there's a question, I think probably some questions about this. Most of the podcasts that are out there, most of the ones that are done repeated are generally discussions. They're not written. And the reason you don't write them is because usually when you get started, you're not making any money doing them. So sitting down and writing an hour of content is 100 times harder than sitting down and talking to someone else about a subject. And so usually most podcasts you see are going to be discussions because they're cheaper to produce, than sitting there and trying to write something that people actually want to listen to. You could just write a book at that point. An audio that, a 1 hour podcast is 1/5 of your way down to just writing a book if you're going to write it all out and read it all out. So, and most podcasts tend to want to be long form. I think there were some questions about short ones. What people tend to like it depends on what you're looking at. The reason video oftentimes wants to be short is because you're monotasking. You're not doing anything else. You're watching the video and you're listening to it, but you can't do a lot of other things and really get the full value. Whereas podcasts, you're oftentimes doing them you're doing them separate, while you're doing something else. I mean, that is the number one way people listen to podcasts. You always have to remember that people are doing something else while they're doing it. And that's 90% of your audience. They're driving, they're doing yard work, they're doing the dishes, they're just taking a walk, but they're rarely like sitting there listening to your podcast. And so, that's one of the other things to kind of keep in mind in there. So as a result, of course, even if we're doing video podcasts, your audio becomes super important, and that is the thing that probably most people doing podcasts fail at, is not taking care of their audio. And you can't always have it perfect, especially if you're bringing in random people every time. But you want to really prioritize that, in my opinion. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I've been in podcasting. I started podcasting around 2005. I was working with a couple other people, and of course with the group over at Tech Podcasts. That was Todd Cochran's brainchild. So I've been. I remember the days that I'm going to sound like the old curmudgeon. You have it better than we did back then, because it was really true. Because I remember my first podcast being dynamic microphone into a Yamaha 8-channel mixer. Audio was analog into the computer, which was Pentium 3, I said 3 or 4 or something like that back then. And then, of course, you would record it. I recorded all my podcasts on Acid, a Sony Acid, which is great software for music recording. And if you utilized it right, it would be great for podcasting, because you could create intros and outros and then have that, and you just basically smack the middle content in there, put it all together and dress it up and go out. The biggest thing was the CDN that you would have to send it to back then, because there wasn't anything like CacheFlies or YouTubes or anything like that you could upload to. So we were using like BearShare and Napster alternatives to send out audio files to hopefully have people pick it up and file share. So it would save us, because it would cost a lot to send a 64 kilobit per second audio file, 15 minutes, to somebody like Alex and the rest of the panel. So nowadays it's a lot better, because you have a whole bunch of different CDNs to choose from. You can choose Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anything like that. And of course, you don't even need to have the RSS, which I won't get into, but you don't even need to have the RSS to create a podcast.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So remember back in the day when all of the amateurs were in the top 10 of iTunes? It was Ask a Ninja, which is a friend of Alex, I think.
Yeah.
The Tiki Room, Soccer Girl. What year were all those amateurs in the top 10 of iTunes?
I think I would have said, I think it's probably 2006, 2005, 2006 is when there was like this explosion of, and, Ask a Ninja, Kent and Doug they were doing it on the web before podcasts were out there. So there wasn't even a podcast. They were doing it on webcast. So they were 2000, I think 3 or 4. And I remember when we went to the first podcasting camp or whatever it was, there was a podcasting convention down in Southern California. I can't remember where, like Orlando or something like, not Orlando, Orange County, I think, or something like that. Like Kent was like a superstar, because it was Ask a Ninja, and he just was like, and Kent's a big guy. I think he's like 6'4", 6'5", and so it was a really big guy with, so it was really a lot of fun. And we should bring him on. We should bring Kent on. I'm sure he'd jump on to talk to us about that. So anyway, but it was. I think that. There's the Tiki Bar, and I forgot about that until you said it. And I think it had a lot of what YouTube has now, which is this kind of open-ended, creative. I want to create a show. I don't have to. There's so much that gets locked up. What I notice now is how much Hollywood is connected to formulas. Right? There's a formula. We're going to make a show. We're going to have this. We're going to have this. We're going to have this. We're going to shake in a little bit of this. And every show is that way because that's how you mass produce things that make money. But the problem is it gets very like I can now, unfortunately, I watch any show and I can just see the formula. Like it's like after a while it's you learn to read the code, and after a while it's blonde, brunette, like Matrix, and you just see like I see what they're doing here. They're setting this up, they're doing this thing, and they're making this work, and it kind of ruins the experience. And what I love about YouTube is that and podcasts is that people are experimenting. They're going all over the place, and they're coming up with new ways to communicate. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think it's interesting. There's we're dancing around the definition of a podcast, and perhaps we should talk about that just for a moment. Some of us are old enough to think of a podcast. To me, I'll say this. To me, a podcast is probably an audio only show, and a lot of people don't constrain to that now. A lot of people are looking at a YouTube series and calling it a podcast. I have a hard time with that. It doesn't feel right to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's just being older. But are we using this word universally for any low budget, potentially low budget created
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good to back up. I think that, I think of podcasts generally as a serialized show that is, by that meaning it's coming out at some certain pace.
Interval.
Every day, every week, every month, whatever that pace is. And so there's an interval to it. You have to have it. You have to figure out what that arc is as you start to build that. And then you have to be able to execute that. And that is a thing, like trying to execute something every week for a long period of time. The first 20 are usually pretty easy. And then after that, like coming up with that. So you really have to think about your model before you get started as you go. And I really want us to move into tech soon as we talk about the podcast as far as technical stuff. But you are right that these are things that are happening, generally as a serial as you put those together.
So we including a YouTube series under the moniker podcast?
Sure. I mean,
okay.
but I would say, I
if that's what you want to do, Alex, then it's your show. You get whatever you want.
Yeah. And I think that, and all of them, when we think about low budget, but like if you listen to the one that is, there's a couple podcasts to listen to if you really want to see how far you can take it. And I think, This American Life is probably one of the ones that if you want to hear like what production can be like, it's not a discussion. But This American Life is the one that, they've got effects and interviews and process, and it takes them, I think it's like 3 to 6 months per episode to produce, that they have people working in parallel. And so it can be a much bigger thing, but the nice thing about podcasts is it can be very inexpensive. Just, 3 interesting people or 4 interesting people can be a relatively inexpensive thing to execute. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I will say to Chris's, I actually wanted to talk about sort of the history, how much more difficult it is now to do, like if you're going to get into video, how much more difficult it is over recording audio podcasts. But to Chris's point, by definition, technically a podcast, and I consider that audio only, is something where the application automatically pulls down the episode. So YouTube doesn't do that, right? I don't like to call a YouTube show a podcast, but I did audio for about 10 years or so. And the one thing this has been fascinating, because technology has changed so much over the years, is that the moment I started putting a camera in here, multiple cameras, a camera switcher, dealing with remote guests, trying to work out how you get isolated audio and mix minuses for video, mix minuses for audio, was so much more complicated. And it has gotten easier over the years, but that was one of the things that was a big hurdle for me.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that's been that we're seeing happen through this is the Zoom ISO stuff is going to continue to make a bigger and bigger difference for what our production pipelines. And so, that's what I'm doing right now is you'll see me experimenting sometimes in the back end, especially over the weekends, where we're grabbing all Zoom ISO allows us, like the show that we're doing here, we're grabbing all those ISO video and ISO audio and so on and so forth out of the system. This removes all the need to deal with all that mix minus between the panelists, and now you're just grabbing their feeds directly out of it. And Zoom has already announced that they're going to allow you to do what's called double ending. And double ending, I think, is going to be a big deal when whenever it comes out. It's going to be a big deal because it means that we can record the video and audio on the remote side. So that's something you want to keep your eye out for. If you're wondering what double ending is, it's recording on both ends. Double ending is recording on both ends, and this has been around in radio for a long time. 50, 100 years. Like I don't know how long, but a long time. As long as they've had recorders, they've said, "Hey, why don't we just record both ends so that if something goes wrong in the middle, we can make this work." And it's allowed people to do things like use phoners. So you'll have a phone call between two people and then record them locally and then re-edit that back together. So those are all things that have been used for a very, very long time to build podcasts. But nowadays with Zoom and with Skype and with a lot of these other bits and pieces, we're able to put those, put that together and re-edit it. It is something you have to think about because if someone has a bad connection, it really, causes issues. And again, we're looking at, as we look at kits for instance, the podcast that we work on with Michael Krasny, I am looking at investing in, right now we send out mics. We send out MB7s to people, and that's pretty much all we send out to people. The video needs to be we try to make it relatively good, but we're really worried about the audio. And I'm very close to including with that a Mac Mini that we can remote into so that we can control it, record it, do all the things locally that we need to do to get that footage out. Because we don't have to deal with the connection. We can also deal with any settings that need to be changed, anything else that needs to be worked out. We're kind of designing this little kit right now that I think we'll show you as we get a little closer to the design. It's going to be an open design. I'll show everybody how we do it. It's not, people can build their own, but we're working on one that should be pretty cool. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
All right. So here's the very quick history of podcasting.
Very quick.
2001, Dave Weiner puts into RSS a special container that'll allow audio, video, PDFs, and e-publications to work into an RSS feed. In 2004, Adam Curry worked with Dave Weiner to kind of make the adjustment for the first technical podcast to go in there. So technically, and by the way, Apple has nothing to do with this at this point. So technically, any audio, video, EPUB or PDF could be labeled a podcast at that point. That brings us to where we are right now, because there's a lot of debate whether YouTube is a podcast because it doesn't have an RSS feed. I don't really care myself, but that's a political debate we don't want to talk about here.
Let's jump into the questions.
Our first question comes from Andy Kokendorfer in VR, Florida, and he says, what tools do you recommend for recording remote guests in high quality, and which mic would you send out to guests? Thanks.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, for mics, I would go with an MV7, which is a very popular choice here. I would send that out to people. And as far as tools, there's hardware and software solutions. Hardware, I like to record guests locally on my Tascam mixer here. You can do that on a Rodecaster console. On a Mac, you can use Audio Hijack, which is very lightweight. You don't necessarily need to use heavyweight applications like Logic or Pro Tools, but you can use software applications like Loopback and Audio Hijack to route stuff into your digital audio workstation if you want to actually go about it that way.
Javier?
But sometimes before I send any technical things, I like to spend an hour or something talking to people to where are they gonna record or where they should do it, because sometimes people are like, I'm gonna do it here in my office or here in my house because I like this space, but they are facing a window which messes their audio, or having their backs against the window which messes their video. So sometimes trying to fix things in the physical world before getting to the electronic world is a lot better, especially like Alec was saying earlier, when you're having a continuous thing that week over week, you can spend some time trying to help them. And then you can choose a mic, because like Jeffrey was saying, sometimes a dynamic mic would be better, sometimes a condenser would be better, but I try to spend some time trying to solve the physical part of the equation before throwing gear into it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the MV7, it depends on how much money you want to spend and whether you want to spend money shipping a mic and the whole setup to them and back. The one thing we looked at and tried out recently was these piles. It's not a large diaphragm condenser, but it plays one on TV. It's about a medium size. It has the same elements in it that the Behringer Bigfoot has. Only has a single element cardioid, but it comes with a good shock mount, a good table stand, a good pop filter, and a case for $40. And when they were on sale, they were $29, I think I got one for. So you could send that out to somebody and not even worry about shipping it back, because it probably costs more to ship it back than it costs, and let them keep it, and then use Zoom to record if you're going to use them this is for remote people coming into a podcast, if you're going to use Zoom as your interface for that podcast so that you can hear them. Generally, people that want to use just their laptop mic or something, this will make enough of an improvement by moving the microphone closer to them, right, a few inches from their mouth. And it'll give you a nice, clean signal-to-noise ratio, and that condenser is certainly good enough. It's not as good as the Stellar X2 that Alex and I are using, which it's about 4 times the price. But it'll get the job done, and I think for most people it would make a great improvement over most anything people would have in their house at the current time.
Yeah, it's funny how first impressions make a difference. I ordered the Pile because we were talking about it, and the problem is that I pulled it out of the box, plugged it in, and got a huge buzz. Like, it just immediately, as I plugged it in, I got this ground loop that was like some kind of grounding problem. And what it took to fix it was to tighten the bottom up to, it was something, the bottom came out of the case loose. And I was like, it wasn't very hard for me to figure it out. But I was like, no. like I'm not going to send this out to anybody.
It is a metal case. It feels good, but like you say, if it's an assembly problem, if they just didn't screw it on all the way.
They didn't, but the problem was the first mic I bought was that, and I was like, the idea of trying to explain what I did in a second to someone who doesn't use mics was like, that's going to be hard to send out. Because when I look at a mic that's under $100, I'm not looking at how I'm going to use it. I'm looking at how I'm going to send it to somebody. And the things that scare me about mics are dials and anything that would be hard for them to put together. Another one is like the Behringer Bigfoot. The problem with it is that number one is it comes with the old USB. So if you miss it, finding those are now getting pretty hard. The other problem is that if you stand it up, it shears the USB. Like it literally, if you put the USB in and then turn it vertical, it bends the USB that it came with to 90 degrees. I have it around here somewhere, so that became the no, that's the hard part is that these little design errors, you have to think about, like, I'm sending this to someone who doesn't know anything about tech, and it has to be perfect, for me to do that, because otherwise we just can't get a show out. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So this was, when this came out, this was the godsend. If you don't want to pay for the MV7, this is the Audio-Technica 2100. And podcasters ate this up because it had the XLR and a USB connection on there. So they could hook it up to their mixer, they could hook it up to their computer. The problem that Alex just said, the one problem that with this microphone is this guy right here. I hate microphones with switches on them. Because that can be a single point of failure. Audio-Technica now has the 2005. This one was like $40 when they first brought it out. I think they jumped up to about $80, but there's still sub $100 microphones that do a really good job in getting audio.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. If you don't have the time to do a double ender where you have both sides record their audio and video, and then you would basically you would work it in post. If one of the nice things about having a digital mixer is that, for example, like with me, I can EQ somebody's voice. I can apply noise suppression. I can EQ their voice. So if they're coming in on, say, the built-in mic on a laptop, which everyone hates, but if that's your only option and you don't have the budget to send a kit, at least with a digital mixer you can apply EQ, and that's one way around it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is important is recording ISOs. So you want to always find a way that you're going to be able to record the other side, whether it's over Zoom or whether it's over. And one of the interesting things is, a lot of times we make decisions, at first you think, well, I'm always going to have original sound on for Zoom, and sometimes that does not make it better. It makes it harder for you to, you don't get the quality. But if they have a good mic, we had a guest on a couple weeks ago that had a good mic, and they had never they didn't have it activated original sound. They'd never turned it on. And we were like, hey, why don't we give that a shot? Because we could tell that they had a good mic. And as soon as they did that, it sounded infinitely better. And there's someone that does podcasts. And so it was one of those things that you want to kind of push, towards those things. and know what they have on their end. I will say that I try to, and I admit that I'm pretty specific, that I really think it's important that it's comfortable to listen to, and we do everything we can. We don't get every podcast right just because of a variety of technical issues, but we do everything we can to make sure that it's a very listenable, like it's comfortable to listen to. It's all the same there. Things aren't too tinty. There's not a lot, and so for us, sending mics out became kind of just what we need to do to make that happen. I have to admit that we've tested lots and lots of mics and making decisions. A lot of it has to do with what do those mics sound like in an environment. This gets into the off-axis rejection issue. We can't control their environment. So how do we have something that has as much off-axis as possible that also has a USB input? I wish more mics. I'm figuring that there must be a patent somewhere that's stopping mics from putting a micro SD card into them. There's one mic that does that out of the UK, where you can put a micro SD card into the mic itself and record right on the mic. And I'm guessing that there's a patent there somewhere that's keeping everybody else from doing it, because like if you look at the new Rode mic, the Generation 5, which I think I'm going to get soon, as a test, it is I'm very interested in that one because it does 32-bit float out, which would be really useful for correction and so on and so forth. But what I really want is just to have it done in the mic, so that it can be recorded there. But because nothing else has it other than like one mic, I'm assuming that there's some legal reason that they can't do it. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. YouTube Shorts boost discoverability and subscriptions. Any value in doing audio podcast shorts, a daily 2 to 4 minute episode, or is it better to push those to social media and keep the podcast longer? What content would you listen to in audio shorts?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I don't know if audio-only shorts is a thing that's supported. I've never tested out. Maybe that's something Jeffrey can speak to. But in my experience, doubling down on shorts, on this type of vertical content in the last 6 months has been incredibly useful. I mean, I have one video that I was working on for a client and it went viral. We had in the last 5 days, we had almost 300 subscribers to the YouTube channel just coming from that video alone, over 200 comments, lots of engagement. So I definitely see the benefits. I was very hesitant. So if you haven't actually tried shorts, I think it's incredibly valuable and you should absolutely do it.
But shorts are 1 minute, right? I mean, technically shorts are a minute long, right? So
yeah, 60 seconds.
Yeah, which is great. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Actually, 59.959. Otherwise, if you hit 1 minute, it'll turn it into a regular YouTube video. With shorts, as Alexander, it's more visual than audio. So podcasters, the early podcasters that utilize YouTube would do the whole waveform thing for video, and then they'd make sure that they would transcribe it and put it in there. Now, there's a lot of programs nowadays that putting a transcription into a 1 minute video is not that difficult to do, but I would highly recommend it because a lot of people watch shorts rather than listen to it. As for the social media aspect of it, not all social media channels will accept a short. Like for instance, Reddit or Tumblr. If you try to put a short into your feed, it's going to say we don't recognize that format, and then you can't do anything past that. So if that's what you're looking for, then you might want to wait till they fix those problems.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, one thing I discovered the hard way with Instagram Reels. Now, you can do longer videos on Instagram, but I found that if you upload anything that's longer than 90 seconds, you cannot boost that post. You cannot advertise on it, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think they're trying to keep people from spamming everybody with long emails. I know that my usage of TikTok dropped like 90% when they went over a minute. Like I just was like, oh, because it's so hard for an amateur to maintain production quality for a long period of time if they're trying to do anything that's in a format that needs to be dense. I think that things that I think I'd be interested in, and we've been talking about it here internally, is like news. I would love to have a podcast that I listened to that was 4 or 5 minutes long that told me all the new audio and video stuff that was released yesterday. Like there's or new announcements from this or things that you might be interested in and so on and so forth. The only thing I have to figure out is for me, I feel like you want to have a link to that thing, so I've been thinking about like what would that look like to make that work, and so those are the kind of things that I'm still pondering. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. I'm considering DistroKid. It claims to offer copyright protection for your own songs, covering covers of previous artists' songs, the licensing of that, and does Apple Music, Spotify, and so forth do that? Thoughts?
Yeah, it's getting covered for whatever getting released to do that song is the tricky part, right? So that's I would worry if I'm doing covers, I would probably worry less about the copyright of your own work as much as I would worry about the getting released for the other people's work. So if they're doing that, it definitely makes it easier. It is a lower license, and lots of people do covers, and there's a payment to make, and it's not very big to do a cover of somebody else. So it is a little bit. It takes some expertise. So if that's what they're doing, as far as covering your own thing with a copyright, maybe if you're getting enough people, but you really have to decide how many people are listening to it. That's always the challenge there. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, a little complex because you've got all sorts of different kinds of rights and you're dealing international. I know you're in New Zealand, Peter, but there's U.S. copyright laws. There's other countries that have copyright laws. Derivative works are generally dealt with, but you've got also lots of different rights, composer rights, performance rights, synchronization rights. This is a thicket to walk down. Hopefully it makes it easy, though, this service, maybe. Check it out.
You go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the service does as far as copyright protection. I think it allows original musicians to upload their stuff to this distributor. You pay $29.95, and it will then try and get your stuff, or will supposedly get your stuff posted on Spotify, Apple Music, etc. And then they do not take a percentage of any downloads or subscriptions you get off of those retailers, those other distributors, TikTok, Spotify, and so on. So I'm not sure exactly how it works. And the copyright issue, I don't know, will they defend you if you have to sue somebody for copyright infringement? Do they apply DRM to your music when they upload it? There's a lot of fuzzy areas there.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
CD Baby is pretty much the same thing, but when you start doing that, you get into a new sticky wicket, and especially if you start using your own songs inside of your YouTube videos or whatever.
Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. Anyone using the Hindenburg 2 beta for podcast editing?
Go ahead, Alexander.
I haven't tried the beta, but it looks like it has some interesting, big features. Now it actually does video and it has audio transcriptions, which is interesting. For me personally, and as someone who's an audio engineer, and I don't know if they've addressed this in the beta, I cannot get past rectified waveforms. How do you correct for DC offset, asymmetry in the human voice if there's an issue, phase problems, when you can only see one axis of the waveform? It drives me insane. I just can't do it.
Go ahead, Bill.
I just can't believe they named something Hindenburg 2. Is your goal to crash and burn? What's the point of that? That's just weird.
Yeah, it's an interesting set of tools. It looks very pretty as far as what it looks like. The interface looks great. I haven't used it. I have to admit that I do the podcast in Logic, and the reason I do it in Logic is mostly because I want to use Logic for other things, and I just want to keep on learning the keystrokes for everything, so that as I move faster through that, I'm doing wax on, wax off. I don't want to. I tend to want to use the same thing so that I get better at it, so that when I'm using it for other things, I can. So, but this looks like a very pretty app to use. One thing I wouldn't do is use GarageBand. People do podcasts in GarageBand, and it's just really slow. So I would probably not recommend that. Next question.
Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona. How important is it to hire an audio editor to clean up and enhance the recording of each episode?
Javier.
It depends on how much time do you spend before the recording, like setting up, like we were talking about, the physical location, the good choice of mic, doing a pre-check like we do here at the morning, that everyone's at the same level. Talk about like when you're not speaking, mute yourself. Like if you take everything that into account, and if you have a good recording, you can do a live mix and it will work. You don't need like a special editor for every episode. When you don't pay attention to those things, and you have different levels, different sounding mics, different people not muting themselves, like all of that, you're gonna need an editor. So it's like in every production, every dollar spent in pre saves you $10 in the post production.
Go ahead, Alexander.
I didn't realize I had my hand raised. Sorry.
No. Chris?
Hey, Chris, how you doing? I think that there are two schools of thought when it comes to producing a podcast. Again, what exactly is that? Being an editor, I'm pro hiring editors or having people work on things to make it better. But I think that, and we talked about, I think we touched on this a little earlier, in producing a podcast, you want to make sure that you are designing a workflow that you can actually execute in a timely manner. If you have to come to a grinding halt to polish and fix and adjust and edit, and I need to take out all my ums. I mean, you might be in the wrong business. I just said it. So I think that what I always advise people to do is to find a workflow that allows you to meet your production schedule. I would recommend like a week, one a week. And if you can't pull that off, I did it again. If you can't pull that off with your workflow, then you might have to either lower your expectations of what you call a done project or extend the schedule. Maybe you can't do it in a week. I would try and figure out a way to do it in a week, figure out how long it takes, and build your workflow around the amount of time that you can dedicate to it. You may not have time to really edit and polish. You might have to I think the goal about a good conversation, and I think we do it here, the goal in a good conversation is, can I do it live? Shouldn't I be able to just do it live? I think my favorite podcasts are recorded in one hunk. Everything, all the sound effects, all the very little post at all.
And do you like the sound effects?
Done well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Done poorly? Absolutely not. Very few people can do it well.
Almost nobody.
Almost nobody.
And if you're getting started, don't.
No, absolutely.
It's like, I admit, I look at it through the lens of the fact that I don't even, so I have to always qualify this. I don't even like going to a bar that has music in it. Like I like things to be quiet, and I
stay
like
home
to be able
a
to
lot.
Focus on. Sorry.
Do you stay home a lot?
I do stay home a lot. I don't like the din of anything, at all. And so for me, adding things like with the podcast that we do, I don't have an open. Like I don't want to, because I get frustrated. Like when anybody has an open to a show, I'm like, why am I here? Like, why are you doing this? I just want you to start talking. And as soon as I get to the end, I cut it off and I move on to the next thing. Like, and so I like the 10 seconds or 15 seconds to me is like, okay, fine. Like you have to do this thing. And so it's an annoyance for me. So as a result, like with Michael Krasny's show, it starts with him talking, introducing the person. We go into it. He thanks people at the end. We close it off. And I don't want anything else other than that conversation to be part of that process. And so, and that is definitely a personality thing, of whoever's designing the show. But I won't listen to, I'll listen to This American Life because all the sound effects they're adding are really adding something. They're adding nat sounds and all kinds of other things and mixing and they're creating a stage of where you're at. So them doing that kind of work, I love. If I had the budget, I would do that too. But adding like whiz bang things to it, I usually don't listen to those kind of podcasts for more than like an episode or two. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
One follow-up. Alex, on several occasions, you've talked about how you can't listen to things in real time. 1.25, 1.5.
So why are you talking so slow? Well, not you.
You're Michael.
To it.
No, I'm horrible. The Michael Krasny show, can you listen to it in real time?
No, I listen to it. When I listen to it, I listen to it fast. I mean,
I'm worried about you. No, I mean, I'm genuinely worried about you.
Okay.
I think that this is something that you should work at. I think you need to slow down a little.
My whole life, you don't understand that my whole life was wrapped around waiting for people to get to the point. And I finally have a tool that allows me, after all these years, I finally have a tool in almost every player that allows me to do that. And it's just magical. Like, it's just like, oh my, like my whole, like there's usually, and I'm usually listening to people just going,
I would like to, somebody has done a psychological study on this. Somebody, and we're going to find it. I don't think, I genuinely, friend to friend, I genuinely don't think it's healthy.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Courtney.
AADD, Alex. AADD. Yeah, it depends. As you touched on earlier, it depends on the level of the podcast you're producing. In This American Life, I was going to mention that, or Radio Lab.
Yeah,
if you're doing one podcast a week and you're going to craft it and make it interesting to everybody, and it's an hour, it has to maintain someone's interest for a whole hour long with just audio. Sure, you would hire an editor and do it. If it's something like this where we do it live, we're finished and it's posted on the internet almost immediately, there is no editing, other than top and tails and a little whispering over the closing credits. That's it. Exactly. So it depends on the. We don't enhance anything with anything,
Well, we have pretty good setups. Pretty good
rim shop.
We have pretty good setups. Yeah, that helps a lot. I mean, but again, it helps a lot that we have good setups, and that is one of the things that makes the quality of the mic, especially if you're doing a podcast with the same people over and over again. The quality of their setup becomes really important. It's one thing to send out mics to someone you're interviewing, but I would not recommend doing a podcast with someone not willing to invest a little bit in their setup. If they're not going to get a good mic, don't put them on the show regularly. You want to have them, and almost everybody that does. I would argue that almost all the podcasts that are doing really well are often double ending. Definitely have good microphones. Definitely are thinking about those things. That's table stakes at this point. If you're putting out a podcast that everybody's sitting around recording bad audio, that was competitive 10 years ago, but you can't do it now. It's just too inexpensive to do a great job. Go ahead, Bill.
Chris, it also depends on where you're targeting. I've been doing some long form content just recently for a pretty gigantic national service. And it's interesting, when I first did it, I sent in my first files and I got back some tech notes, and they were very specific, like your RMS levels need to come up 2 dB. So I went back and I reproduced the entire long form program. It was about 3 hours long. With those new, and then I got another note back, well, now the peaks are hitting above our peak limiting. So I had to go back in and apply a peak limiter and get the recipe for the audio more dialed in to meet their standards. Some people will want that at the professional level. Other people don't care. You can be in a range of variants. So really it depends on what you're trying to go for. Just know that if you really want a big distribution, sometimes the big guns do have pretty specific requirements for every aspect of your audio levels and will require you to meet them.
Yeah, the other thing for editing, a lot of times we cut little things out, like, oh, we shouldn't have said that. Oh, we didn't do this. And if you're doing it live, it's one thing. But if you're not, if you're going to put it out to a lot more people, like the Michael Krasny show might be, there might be anywhere from 30 to 100 people watching the show, asking questions live. And that's another thing that we've taken on, is not just having us do the podcast, but do the podcast with people that are able to listen to it and able to have it, be part of the discussion, and I think and sometimes there's a lot of people there. Like we have Walter Murch coming at the end of the month, which will probably have a lot of us here wanting to be part of that conversation. And so you get a lot of questions in there. And that's one of the ways it's easier to generate the content, is to have the audience actually be part of that. But then we also remember that there's 100 people that watched it live. There's going to be 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people that are going to watch it later. And so we want to make, if there's little things we want to clean up as far as how we phrase things, if we missaid something or something like that, that's where ISO audio becomes super important. If you don't have ISO audio, that kind of edit becomes really painful. in that area. And so you also want to think about that. And then the other thing that I've done with some shows, so like when we had when we had someone on that was coming in from the other part of the world. So Vienna was actually, we interviewed Vienna, and she was coming over. The delay between our office and her created a thing that made her sound like she was taking too much time to answer the question. And so I went through, because it was Vienna, I went through and I tightened the whole thing up. Like I literally just pulled everything together because I knew it wasn't her deciding that. It was the delay of it getting to her and back, that latency. And so I removed all the latency. And basically in an hour, it cut about 3 minutes out of the whole thing by just taking 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, or 1 second or whatever, and just pulling it in, and it sounded like a much better show. so if you download that show, you'll notice it, and I was like, I'm gonna do this for all the podcasts, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was a lot of work. Like I don't know if I'm gonna do that for all the podcasts. And so it started off that way, but it does, like if I had the time or I had an editor, I would definitely, and this is the thing that you always want to look at when you hire someone to do something that's good at what they do and they do it, you'll make a better show because you can. When you don't have that, you don't make quite as, having more resources allows you to do a lot of things. And sometimes, I'll experiment with a lot with the podcast, but anyway, next question.
Next question comes to us from
Chris,
Jack.
What is Chris?
What?
Yeah, I was searching for the thing. I was trying to raise my hand. I just have to say, something you just said there tells me so much about Alex Lindsay. You said, if I had the time, or if I just had an editor that I could ruin his day, like you said, I'm paying them. I get it, but there was something about that. If I had the time or an editor, there was so
hiring teams is so that is providing you with more time. Like those things. That's how things get done. I've hired you because I don't have the time or the skill in some cases to do what I need to do. So anyway,
it was just funny the way you said it. I just sorry.
You make better. Here's the thing: is that, and I noticed this. This is not quite podcasting, but Chris and I worked on a project, one of the first projects we worked on, and there were many things that I wouldn't do because it was going to be hard to edit, that I then asked Chris to do because he was editing it. And I was making very small connections that I wouldn't make on my own because I'd be like, oh, and Chris was much faster at it. And I'm paying him to do, that's what I'm paying him to do. And so that I can be creative and say, I really don't like that thing. I really this doesn't quite feel the way I want it to feel. And those things, getting it into having somebody else doing that you're generally paying to do that. And oftentimes, a reasonable amount of money, that's what you do. And podcast editors don't have to cost as much as video editors. There's a lot of good people that will do it at a relatively, good cost.
One of our editors has a saying. He always says that and I've said this here before, Steve Navrat, there's a difference between an editor and somebody who edits. And
right.
And one of the things I always tell people, and this is kind of what you just touched on here, was you would ask me to do it because you didn't have to slog through the mechanics of it. And I always tell editors that you need to have a level of proficiency so that you don't make qualitative decisions based on how hard something is going to be to actually execute it.
Right.
If you're thinking, oh, boy, that's going to take a while, you're in the wrong business. Period.
And the thing is, it's not only that. If you hire an editor, I'm going to ask you to do something that I creatively want to be done, and I don't know how to do it, and I don't know the best way to do it. And there'll be little things about it, like there's, when someone I was doing a countdown clock yesterday, and the logo had grain in it, and I put the countdown clock over it, and then I added a matching grain to the color of I added a matching grain to the color of the countdown clock so that it would match the gradient and the color to it. That's not something that the client asked for, but that's why you get, paying attention to weird little details are the things that the client goes, oh, I see what you did there. That's, and it's not something they asked for at all. And it wasn't very hard except for the fact that motion doesn't produce grain very effectively.
Was that a byproduct of having Alan on the show yesterday?
No. No, it was done before I saw Alan. Anyway, next question.
Okay, Zach, your question is going to get asked. Here we go. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Zach Phillips. Might it be easier to conceptualize what a podcast is when you accept that YouTube is an audio platform supplemented with video?
Go, Jeffrey.
That's a very good thought right there, Zach. The big thing is if you have YouTube Premium, one of the features of YouTube Premium is that you can shut off your phone, put it in your pocket, and listen to whatever is being said or done. And a lot of people do that nowadays because they hook it up into the car and then they listen to the show instead of watch the show. Or they hook it up, they put it next to their bed, and they get a whole bunch of sleep sounds, or somebody doing some sort of meditation thing. And they have, like I said, they have playlists for that. So this is not only something that you can conceptualize, it's actually something that's happening as long as you have the premium access.
Yeah. And a lot of YouTubers would take offense to that. That's all I'd say, because the best stuff on YouTube is highly visual. And that's part of what makes it great, is that it's visual. I don't watch a lot of stuff on YouTube. Now, I admit, everyone uses YouTube differently. My primary viewing on YouTube is my home theater. So I literally watch it on a 75-inch TV. That's how I watch YouTube. It's just another channel like Netflix or something else to me. And so as a result, I'm sitting there watching it. It better be good. You better be visually good. And a lot of those guys spend a lot of time editing. Go ahead. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway says, are there any plans to publish Office Hours shows as a podcast? It would be great for people that can't catch the show live.
We are so close. Yeah. We should have done it a long time ago, and we just haven't. And it's just one more thing that we got to get done. We need a team that does the podcast. Samuel, I'll expect you to contact us and build the podcast team for us so we can start getting these out. But we've talked about it for a while. There's a couple things we want to do. One is loop things live, so that you could just turn on a channel and you would always just either see or hear the show. So we're looking at that, is being able to just have a looping thing where the last 11 shows are just looping all the time. And then we just drop into this and do it. So you could just leave it on all day. The second thing is a podcast. So some people want the podcast. Some people actually just want to be able to have a radio station they can turn on and listen to us, chit chat. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, as someone who, when I'm not on, I do actually listen audio only a lot of times with my phone in the pocket and the screen locked. So one of the things that I would find very valuable is to have show notes if we're going to have an audio podcast, because I want to know what products people are recommending so I can look at it later.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Next question comes from Ranjan Chandil in Los Angeles. Are audio podcasts usually edited in Pro Tools?
Go ahead, Chris.
Usually is a big word, Rajan. It could be. You could do it. I think a lot of people use Audacity because it's free. You could use Adobe's, what's it called? Audition? Is that what it's called? Audition. Mm-hmm. We produce an audio podcast for one of our clients, and we do it all in Final Cut. The magnetic timeline makes it very easy to do quick pull-ups and stuff like that. What are you laughing at, Bill?
I'm not laughing. I do exactly the same thing. In fact,
Okay.
It's so bad that I've lied to people when they ask me what I do audio, and I say Logic, because everything in Final Cut that does the audio is just the same code from Logic.
Yeah, it's
and they'll
super
accept Logic.
convenient.
They won't think about Final Cut as an audio editor.
Yeah, it's super convenient and does a great job.
Too bad. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, there's a lot of edits I do that would be a lot easier in Final Cut than they are in Logic. Because there's like
Magnetic
select
timeline,
all,
baby.
move over, do all the things. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good.
So sweet.
Mm-hmm.
In, out,
Alexander.
delete, collapse.
Yeah, there's just a bunch of fine tuning that I do in Logic that I think would be harder to do in Final Cut. Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, to say that they're usually edited in Pro Tools, I think that's a tough one to say. I've been using Pro Tools for 20 years, so I use it a lot. I don't think we should get too hung up though on which application should be using and what are people actually using. I think you should just try something if you haven't, see if it works for you. If you haven't actually selected a DAW, I would strongly suggest looking at Audition, just because the sheer number of audio repair tools that Adobe packages in there are just incredible, and it does rival Pro Tools. So I would look there.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'm on a lot of voiceover people's sites, and a lot of people use Audacity. I'm sorry. Audacity is kind of a freeware program that really has a lot of functions. A lot of people use that. I still think that Final Cut is the most amazing audio editor I've found. Generally, because of the magnetism involved, you can do 3-point edits with one click, and magnetism allows the other clicks to be auto-generated. It's really super fast. Plus, it's got a voiceover module that'll give you a punch-in countdown, 3, 2, 1, and insert that's perfectly clean. It is a brilliant thing, but it's not very well used.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
And remember when GarageBand took podcasting out of their app? It's really all about if you can do more than one track at the same time in a lot of podcasting, especially if you're doing one-on-one interviews.
You go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't used it, but a lot of people swear by Reaper. So take a look at that. I think it's cross-platform too.
That's spoken of a lot in the voiceover community too.
Next question.
Next question comes from Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, Germany. He says, for your information, YouTube does have an RSS feed. He's got a smiley emoji and a link.
There we go. Check out that link. It turns out that they do have it there. And I think YouTube is just getting started with what they're doing with podcasting. So they're definitely focused on it. So we'll see how it goes. Next question.
Ryan Shelchuk in Midland, Texas. In Midland, Texas, considering purchasing an ATEM for a multicam podcast. However, at this time, no one is available to camera switch during the recording. Is there any advantage in post?
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, if you get the ISO model, you will have the isolated video feeds coming in, so you can do multicam edits very nicely in DaVinci Resolve with that. So I would look at that. Another option, if you have the budget for it, you could hire somebody and they could remotely cut the show if you wanted to, I suppose.
Yeah, and you can cut. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I've definitely for a long time, Leo was cutting his own shows on a TriCaster, and then when I did my podcast, I did that too. And you get good at it. You sit there and you start tapping it. I don't think it makes as good of a show as a host if you're cutting and doing it, because you are thinking a little bit while you're talking. So I don't think that's great. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is using the Video Follows Audio and Mix Effect Pro to feed all of those out into an ATEM switcher and then use the audio to switch. So then it's very mechanical. It would just switch back and forth, but it might be better than just all four of you up. What I will say is that what I'm doing with the Michael Krasny show is, you don't see these because we're not publishing them yet, but I've been experimenting with them, is I just take Michael Krasny and the person he's interviewing, and I just put them into a 2-up, and we've had a couple with a couple more. I just leave it up the whole time. So do a super source. Now that you couldn't do it with little ATEM, but do a super source of them just all sitting there like your little mini grid. And it just looks very nice. And especially what we're doing is getting the camera angles closer and closer and closer to being straight on. So it's just the two of them talking back and forth. And I actually found that to be a little bit, it's definitely easier to do, but I actually liked it. Just seeing the two, especially when it's 2 to 4 people, it's not that bad. Next question.
Sky Gleason on a phone from Seattle says, what is the panelist view of the BBC radio production style?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I like it. I listen to their news. The only annoying thing is they all have those strange British accents. I just
I think it's good. I think it's good. There is something about it that I tend not to listen to it for very long. So I used to listen to it a lot, and I think I got used to it. There's something about a lot of their IDs, we talked about it before. I don't really like a lot of weird sounds, and they have a lot of things that signify what the next thing is, which I, over time, after listening to it a lot, found it annoying and stopped listening, because it was dun, 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 and now, dun, 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 and they have these little things that they add all to it, and I didn't like that, and so I stopped listening to it. It was really just because of those sounds. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. How is money earned for podcast creators? What's the revenue stream financially for return on investment?
We're running out of time. Jeffrey, real quick.
We'll talk non-YouTube here. First of all, you have brand deals. So you talk to somebody like Nike or something like that, and then they give you money and you do a podcast. Second is affiliate links. So you connect up to like a Radican or something like that, and then you have a 90-second ad in there. Or you do like Amazon links. So you go to my Amazon blah, blah, blah channel, and that's how you're going to get those links. But then they got to click on those links and they got to use your codes. So that's why you see a lot of that in a lot of these shows.
Yeah, and there's advertising companies that are there are advertising companies that will bundle you up with other podcasts. So PodTrack and other ones like that have been out there that will find the advertisers for you as well. It's really hard. It's really hard to make money on podcasting until unless you have a very vertical market that you know how to, work with. 15,000 is where money starts, and real money starts at about 50,000. And you can turn it into a career at about $250,000. That's the number that. So when you start thinking about the numbers and people start talking about numbers, it's really hard. Now I've seen podcasts make a lot of money with 300 subscribers. It was just the right 300. These are bankers, or there's someone who, there are people with a lot of money moving around. Has been the thing that you can do, but it takes a very vertical market to do that. Next question.
Ryan Shuchuk in Midland, Texas says, Alex, do you use a specific screen set or layout to streamline?
Hold on.
Oh,
sorry. What happened was on the back end, they were falling behind, and I tried to catch us back up again because it was driving me crazy. So anyway, but if you refresh, you should see one above that.
The clients. Okay.
Yeah.
Ryan Shuchuk again. Clients asking for on-location video podcast. Is there a 4-person wireless mic solution that won't break the bank?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, with wireless, if you have to use wireless stuff, I don't personally like to cut corners with that stuff. I would normally just rent that stuff, like rent a good one that is going to be reliable. You don't really want to mess with that stuff. If you have to make an investment in something, I don't know, like how often are you doing it? What's the ROI? Because good wireless stuff is going to be expensive.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I agree. Buy once, cry once in this situation. A few years back at South by Southwest, I was at a panel and they were using Pile wireless microphones, and they were just getting all this crosstalk from all these events that were also using wireless microphones. They ended up connecting up to my system because I had the Sony wireless digital mics, and that's how it got the show through. So buy once, cry once.
Go, Courtney.
Yeah, you could go with the DJI wirelesses. They're pretty good, and the nice thing about them, they all record locally in each transmitter as well. So if you have any transmission problems, you'd have yourself covered with recordings on every single transmitter. Get 2 of them. You have 4 inputs for under $600. Just make sure they're close to the receivers. Put the receivers in the middle of the table and make sure the transmitters are facing the receivers. And you should be able to record and broadcast at the same time.
I would never use wireless unless I have to. If people are moving around and you're dealing with wires, then you get wireless. But I would say wireless is not something that you just throw around, in my opinion. There are just so many little things that can go wrong. And especially you go to a South by Southwest, you go to something else like that, you're dealing with so much wireless, chaff that is just everywhere. If I have a podcast, I would be using wires, into what I'm doing. I would not be using it unless you're walking. If the podcast is you walking around, then that makes sense. But if you're all sitting at a table, do not use wireless. Put XLRs in there and get them back to something and record it. It's just that would, you're in trouble. Like if you're going to have trouble. You're going to have breakup in it. You're going to wish that you had just wired it up. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, Alex, do you use a specific screen set or layout to streamline podcast editing in Logic?
Nope. I just open up Logic, I drop the files in, and I start editing. That's all I do. There might be a better way to do it than I do. I'm not going to say that I'm some Logic expert, but that's how I approach it. Next question.
Douglas again with Alex. You mentioned phoners as a part of a podcast. Wouldn't it be much easier to use Zoom Phone or a similar tool for phone interviews because it would be easier to record from Zoom?
I say phoners as a general term of bringing people in. I would never use a phone on a podcast, like ever. Unless someone's like in the way off distance, I wouldn't plan a show around someone using a microphone from their phone. Like it's just, I'm not gonna do that. Just because I want to be able to actually listen to it, So generally we don't even want the laptop mic. So I don't, but that's, you can decide whether people will listen to a podcast with that. I won't. So I don't even listen to the phoners from NPR, so that's about as good as it gets. So if someone is in a call in on a show, I just turn it off. It's like, okay, I can do something else. So it depends on how touchy you are about audio. All right. There we go. That was good. Only 2 minutes over. Sorry, we were moving really fast at the end, trying to get to all the questions before we ran off the cliff there. Thanks to the producers for all the great questions and keeping this conversation going. We really depend on you. If you're a producer out there watching, we're not. What makes this show work is the fact that we don't have to come up with an hour of content. We explain to people like, hey, we're going to talk for 15 minutes and then we're going to open it up to the producers. And so it's great when you're able to fill out those questions and put lots of great questions in. And somehow the producers have been doing that every day for many, 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 many moons at this point. I think we're at, what are we at now? 1,100, 1,200? I don't know. 500? I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot. So really well done. And thanks, of course, to the panel. We can't do this without you. This is the other part that makes it work, is that the panelists are here answering all those questions from all of their individual backgrounds, which makes it way, way better. And then finally, thanks to the incredible team on the back end that's planning this, designing it, executing it, showing up every day to make this happen, worried about it later, trying to figure out what the content is, figuring out what the website looks like, figuring out how the schedule works, getting the notes into YouTube, there's so many things that people are doing to make this whole thing work. And we really appreciate all of your effort. All right. We have, let me see here. 89,000 miles. Almost got to 1K today, 143,000 kilometers. That is 806 million bananas for scale. All right, let's jump into After Hours. I actually have to go edit a podcast.
And if you like what happened here, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast.
Podcast, yes.
That's what you're supposed to say at the end, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Wait, is that leaving out? Click and subscribe.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell. All the rest of those incredibly annoying phrases.
And an angel gets its wings.
I have to edit YouTube Shorts. Takes 45 minutes to get rid of 18 seconds.
Next up on BBC.
Really excited about using YouTube Shorts at NAB. I don't know why I'm so excited about it, but I think it's going to be great. So I think they're going to be a lot of fun. All right, here we go.
Next year we have to have a broadcast booth there so I can be there.
Bye.